On their wedding night, the millionaire whispered, "Trust me," and her world changed forever. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The church bells rang loud and heavy, but no one smiled. The wedding looked like a scene from a glossy magazine. Chandeliers dripping crystals, a white aisle carpet sprinkled with fresh rose petals, and 100 guests dressed in black tie elegance. Yet, there was something strange. The bride's bouquet was not roses, not lilies. She held a bundle of plain white daisies, flowers often seen in roadside ditches. Whispers rippled across the rows of guests. Did she really choose that? One woman hissed. How cheap, in a millionaire's wedding. Cameras flashed, capturing every detail, ready to turn the scene into tomorrow's gossip. At the altar stood the groom, a man whose face graced business magazines, his net worth whispered in billions. He looked immaculate in his tailored suit, but his expression was unreadable, almost bored. He did not even glance at the bride when she walked toward him. For the guests, it felt like watching a business transaction, not a celebration of love. And the bride, our heroine, walked slowly, clutching those daisies tighter, her heart hammered in her chest, but not from excitement. She knew the truth. This was not a wedding born of love. It was a contract, signed in a law office 2 weeks earlier. A contract that stated, in bold letters, marriage duration, 1 year. Every step down that aisle felt like walking deeper into a trap. Her family's debts weighed on her shoulders. This was her only way out. Yet even as she tried to hold her head high, the humiliation burned. She overheard a guest mutter, "She is nothing but a gold digger. He will drop her once he is done." But then came the moment that made the entire room gasp. When the priest asked if the groom would take her hand, the millionaire leaned closer, so close the cameras almost missed it, and whispered into her ear, "Trust me." It was just 2 words. 2 words that made her knees weak. 2 words that seemed out of place, because nothing about this wedding felt trustworthy. And yet, the way he said it, low and certain, made the world blur for a second. What did he mean by that? Was it reassurance or a warning? The bride forced a smile for the cameras as the rings slid onto their fingers. The flashbulbs exploded, sealing the moment forever. To everyone else, it looked like the perfect high society marriage. But behind that carefully staged photo was a secret deal, a ticking clock, and a single whisper that could either save her or destroy her. And this is how their story began. The ceremony was over, but the weight of the contract pressed harder than the wedding gown on her shoulders. The applause from the guests echoed hollow, like a soundtrack played for a scene everyone knew was fake. The millionaire groom shook hands, posed for the flashing cameras, and let photographers capture the image of a perfect couple. Yet when the crowd cheered for them to kiss, his lips only brushed her cheek in the quickest gesture possible. It looked convincing from far away, but up close, she felt nothing but cold air. Later that night, they rode together in a sleek black limousine. The city lights blurred past, but inside the car, silence reigned. She sat rigid, her fingers still gripping the wilted daisies, while he scrolled through his phone as if nothing had changed. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, businesslike. "The lawyers will handle the accounts. Your family's debts will be cleared by the end of the month. In exchange, you will attend every public event with me, smile when the cameras flash, and maintain the image of a devoted wife. Do you understand?" She nodded, though her throat ached. This was the script she had agreed to. She remembered the bold letters on the paper. Marriage duration, 1 year. Divorce to be filed discreetly afterward. Terms, penalties, clauses. It was a contract more binding than any vow spoken at the altar. The limousine stopped at his mansion, a sprawling glass and steel estate perched on the hillside, overlooking the glittering skyline. She had never seen anything so vast. Marble steps, fountains, and staff, lining the entrance as though she were royalty. But the way they looked at her, measured, skeptical, reminded her she did not belong. Inside, the staff bowed and withdrew, leaving them alone. He led her to a study, not a bedroom. On the desk lay the signed contract, neatly folded beside 2 glasses of untouched champagne. He gestured for her to sit. "We will review the rules once more," he said. "Number 1. Your private life is your own, as long as it does not interfere with the arrangement. Number 2. You will accompany me whenever required. Number 3. We will keep our distance in private. This is not a love match, and we will not pretend otherwise when no one is watching." His eyes flicked toward her bouquet lying on the chair, its petals already drooping. A small crease appeared between his brows, almost irritation, almost curiosity. "Why daisies?" he asked abruptly. She swallowed. "Because roses are too obvious. Daisies are honest." He stared for a long moment, as though trying to read her through that simple answer, before dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "Honesty will not survive in this house," he muttered. That night, in the master suite, the vastness of the room felt suffocating. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the glittering skyline through the window. The door opened, and he entered, still in his suit, tie loosened. He crossed the room and stopped at the foot of the bed. For the first time, his expression softened. He leaned closer, his voice dropping into that same whisper from the altar. "Trust me, follow the rules, and you will survive this." Her chest tightened. It sounded like advice from an ally, yet also like a threat. She could not tell which. And before she could ask, he turned, retreating to the adjoining room, leaving her in silence. Alone in the darkness, clutching her sketchbook, the only personal item she had brought with her, she wondered if she had just entered a gilded cage. The deal had begun, the rules were clear. But nothing about the way he said, "Trust me," felt like part of the contract. It felt like a warning, and perhaps something more. This was not marriage, this was survival. And it was only the first night. The morning after their wedding night, the mansion already felt like a prison. Sunlight streamed through tall glass windows, but the brightness only revealed the cold emptiness of the house. Staff moved like shadows in the halls, polite but distant, never meeting her eyes for long. She sat at the long dining table, a table built for 20, yet there was only one plate set at the far end. A single cup of coffee, a slice of toast, all arranged with perfect precision. She forced herself to eat, her hands trembling as the silence stretched. Then the heavy double doors opened, and he appeared, dressed sharply in a navy suit, phone in hand, already talking business. He did not even sit down. "There is a board meeting. You will join me. Do not speak unless spoken to. And remember, smile." His words were clipped, efficient, the tone of a man used to commanding entire rooms. Hours later, she found herself standing in the gleaming lobby of his company headquarters, surrounded by polished marble, towering glass walls, and a swarm of employees who looked at her as though she were an intruder. Cameras clicked the moment they stepped out of the car, and she remembered his warning, "Smile." So she did, lips curving into a picture-perfect grin, even as her chest tightened. Inside the boardroom, the tension was worse. Men in tailored suits whispered to one another, their eyes flicking to her with barely concealed disdain. One of them, a senior executive with graying hair, leaned toward another and said just loud enough for her to hear, "So this is the bride? She looks provincial." A ripple of chuckles followed. Her cheeks burned. She lowered her eyes, gripping the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to disappear. But then she heard his chair scrape back. The millionaire rose, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Is there a problem with my wife's presence?" His voice was calm, but every syllable carried weight. The room fell silent. No one dared to answer. He sat back down, signaling the meeting to continue. For a brief second, her eyes met his. There was no smile, no warmth, but there was something else, something that looked like protection. He had defended her, even if he would never admit it aloud. The meeting dragged on, hours of financial reports and corporate strategy. She stayed quiet, her mind drifting, until she noticed his hand resting on the table, pen tapping lightly. A small, almost imperceptible movement. She remembered his whisper, "Trust me." Was this another test? Afterward, as they left the building, the press swarmed. Microphones shoved forward, questions fired like bullets. "Mr. Anderson, Is it true your marriage is only for business? Mrs. Anderson, how do you feel marrying a man worth billions? The chaos overwhelmed her. Flashbulbs exploded in her face, and she froze, unable to move. Then, without hesitation, his arms slid around her waist, pulling her close. To the cameras, it looked like affection, a gesture of love. But to her, it was a lifeline. He leaned down, his voice a whisper only she could hear. Breathe. Just breathe. Her heart stuttered. For a man who insisted this marriage was only a deal, he had a strange way of blurring the lines. His touch lingered a moment too long before he let go. The crowd roared with questions, but the photographs told a different story. The powerful millionaire and his devoted wife, united against the storm. That night, when they returned to the mansion, she sat on the balcony clutching her sketchbook, replaying every moment. The humiliation, the defense, the whisper and the chaos. She wondered which part was real and which part was still the contract. The truth was unclear, but one thing she knew: she was no longer invisible. The world was watching, and so was he. The weeks that followed turned into a careful dance between appearances and reality. To the public, they were a picture-perfect couple. Magazines ran glossy covers of their outings. Her in elegant gowns, him in flawless suits, their hands intertwined as they smiled for the flashing cameras. But behind closed doors, silence filled the mansion. They lived under the same roof, yet their worlds barely touched. Still, small cracks began to appear in the wall he had built. One evening, after a charity gala, rain poured down in sheets as they left the venue. The chauffeur had not arrived yet, and the press lingered outside with umbrellas and cameras. Without hesitation, he slipped off his tailored coat and draped it over her shoulders. To the onlookers, it was the perfect romantic gesture. To her, it was startlingly genuine. The coat was warm, heavy, and carried the faint scent of cedarwood and smoke. For the first time, she saw a glimpse of a man, not just a millionaire bound by a contract. Later that night, she sat at the kitchen counter, sketchbook open, trying to capture the way the rain had blurred the city lights. She did not hear him enter until his shadow fell across the page. "You draw," he said, his tone more observation than question. She closed the book quickly, embarrassed. But his hand reached out, taking the sketchbook before she could stop him. He flipped through page after page, small drawings of flowers, cityscapes, even his silhouette standing by a window. His brow furrowed, as if the simple sketches unsettled him more than any boardroom battle. "You see too much," he murmured, closing the book and handing it back. For a moment, his gaze lingered on her face, softer than she had ever seen it. Then, just as quickly, he turned away, retreating to his study. The next morning brought another test. She accompanied him to a lavish luncheon hosted by his family. The dining hall glittered with chandeliers, gold cutlery, and the sharp edges of whispered judgment. His sister, draped in designer silk, leaned across the table with a smile that dripped with poison. "Tell us, dear, what exactly did you do before marrying my brother? Surely you had some occupation?" The room chuckled quietly. Her throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but words tangled on her tongue. The humiliation burned hotter than the champagne in her glass. Before she could respond, he set down his fork with a deliberate clink. "Her past is none of your concern," he said firmly. Eyes locked on his sister. "What matters is that she is my wife, and you will show her respect." The table fell silent. His sister's smirk faded, replaced by a brittle smile. She felt her breath catch. For once, he had not just played the role of a husband, he had acted like one. On the drive back, neither of them spoke. The city lights streaked across the tinted windows, casting shadows over his face. "Finally," he said quietly, "you do not have to answer them. Ever." Her eyes stung, though she could not tell if it was from relief or confusion. The contract had never promised protection, and yet he had given it anyway. That night, lying awake in the vast master bedroom, she replayed every moment: the coat on her shoulders, the sketchbook in his hands, the defense at the dining table. Each act was small, but together they formed a question she could not ignore. If this marriage was only a deal, then why did it feel more real with every passing day? And why did his whispered words, "Trust me," echo louder than the vows they had never meant? The seasons shifted, and with them, The walls around her new life began to crack in unexpected ways. What had started as a business arrangement, cold and calculated, began to blur with moments she could not explain. The millionaire who had drawn a clear line between contract and intimacy was slipping, little by little, into something that felt human. One evening, after a long day of appearances, she found herself in the kitchen past midnight. The marble counters gleamed under the soft lights, and she thought she was alone. She opened the fridge, pulled out a carton of milk, and laughed quietly at herself for drinking straight from the glass like she used to back home. That was when he appeared, tie loosened, jacket draped over his arm. "You actually live here," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. She froze, embarrassed, but his lips curved in the faintest trace of amusement. For the first time, he poured himself a glass of milk and sat across from her at the counter. No cameras, no staff, no family watching, just two people sharing a midnight drink. For a brief moment, it felt real. Another evening, rain struck again. They had just left a business banquet when the storm erupted, sheets of water pounding the pavement. He pulled her close beneath his umbrella, but the wind was so fierce that they ended up drenched anyway, laughing breathlessly as they dashed toward the car. It was absurd, undignified, nothing like the polished images the world expected from them. Yet in that laughter, she saw him differently. His laughter was unguarded, free, like a boy who had not been forced into a throne of glass and steel. But the tenderness was fragile. The next day, she wandered through his study while he was away. Papers and files were stacked in rigid order, but one folder lay open on the desk. Curiosity tugged at her, and before she realized it, she was reading. It was filled with reports about her family's debts, her personal history. Every detail of her life recorded in cold black ink. Her chest tightened. He had known everything before offering the contract. Every weakness, every desperation, he had used it to his advantage. When he returned, she confronted him. "Did you marry me to save me, or because you knew I was desperate enough to say yes?" Her voice trembled. His eyes flickered, but his expression remained composed. "I told you from the beginning, this is a deal. Do not confuse necessity with kindness." His words stung like ice, undoing every fragile moment they had shared. She turned away, tears stinging her eyes, but then she heard his voice again, softer, almost broken. "But I also told you to trust me." The contradiction echoed in her heart. She wanted to hate him for his manipulation, yet the memory of him standing against his family, shielding her from the press, laughing in the rain, it all blurred the lines. That night, she drew him in her sketchbook, not as the untouchable millionaire, but as the man who had whispered, "Trust me," twice too many times for it to be meaningless. She closed the book and pressed it to her chest, knowing that the more real this marriage felt, the closer she was drifting toward a heartbreak she might not survive. For the first time, she wondered if she was not just playing her part in the contract, but falling into something she had sworn she never would. The fragile balance of their arrangement began to collapse the moment whispers started spreading. At first, it was just a few anonymous posts online, questioning why a billionaire would suddenly marry a woman no one in society circles had ever heard of. But soon the rumors snowballed into headlines. Tabloids printed photographs of her with captions dripping with venom. "From rags to riches," or "just a gold digger." At the mansion, her phone buzzed endlessly with cruel comments. She stopped opening her social media accounts, but the words still reached her. Even staff members in the house began to exchange, knowing glances when they thought she was not watching. The air grew heavy with suspicion. Then came the dinner party, a glittering event hosted by one of his competitors. They attended together, all eyes fixed on them, as they entered the ballroom. She wore a gown chosen carefully by his stylist, every thread meant to scream elegance, but the whispers followed her like shadows. A woman in a sequin dress leaned toward her companion and sneered just loud enough for her to hear. "I heard they have a contract. A 1-year deal. Imagine selling yourself like that." The words hit her like a slap. She froze, nails digging into her clutch, her smile brittle under the chandeliers. She glanced at him, wondering if he had heard. But he was deep in conversation with another executive, his expression unreadable. For the first time, she felt utterly alone in a crowded room. The humiliation did not stop there. The next morning, a major newspaper released a story with alleged proof of the contract. Scanned pages, blurred signatures, terms of their arrangement splashed across headlines. The world devoured it instantly. Reporters camped outside their gate, demanding answers. She became the target of ridicule. "She trapped him," one headline screamed. "She is nothing but a liar," another accused. Inside the mansion, she confronted him, voice breaking. "Did you know this would happen? Did you ever think about what it would do to me?" His jaw tightened. "I told you there would be risks." Her heart cracked. "Risks? They are tearing me apart out there. They are calling me every name, dragging me through the mud. Do you care at all, or am I just collateral damage in your war with your family and your company?" For once, his silence was louder than any answer. His eyes flickered with conflict, but he said nothing. That silence was enough. That night, she packed a small bag. Her sketchbook slipped inside, pages filled with all the moments she was no longer sure were real. She left the mansion quietly, slipping past the staff who pretended not to see. Outside, the rain had returned, drenching her as she walked away from the glittering prison. She told herself it was over. The contract might have bound her legally, but her heart could no longer survive the weight of humiliation. Every promise, every whisper of, "Trust me," felt like a cruel joke now. What she did not know was that he had seen her leave. From the window of his study, he watched her disappear into the storm. And for the first time, the man who had built walls higher than his skyscrapers felt the ground beneath him begin to shake. The crisis had arrived, and the cost of their contract was no longer measured in dollars or boardroom power. It was measured in the fragile, breaking heart of the woman he had sworn he would never need. The fallout was immediate. The board of directors demanded answers. Shareholders questioned his judgment. Competitors circled like vultures, eager to exploit the scandal. The leaked contract had turned into a weapon, and the woman he had married was being crucified in the public eye. At the emergency board meeting, the room buzzed with accusations. "This marriage was a sham," one director said coldly. "You have compromised the integrity of this company." Another added, "We cannot afford a leader whose personal life is a circus." The weight of their stares pressed down on him. For years, he had ruled this table with unshakable authority. But today, they thought they had cornered him. He rose slowly, buttoning his jacket, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "The marriage began as a contract." Gasps rippled through the boardroom. Murmurs erupted like wildfire. He let them fume for a moment before continuing. "But you are mistaken if you think that makes her unworthy. I chose her. Not for convenience, not for image. I chose her because she is the only one I trust." "Ja." The directors exchanged stunned looks. Some scoffed, others shifted uncomfortably. One sneered. "Are you saying you risk this entire empire for her?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "I would risk everything. Because unlike this table, she has never lied to me." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, they saw a man not protecting his wealth, but protecting a woman who had been dragged through the mud for his sake. Meanwhile, across town, she sat in her modest apartment, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. She had seen the headlines and assumed he had abandoned her to save himself. But then the live broadcast of the board meeting began trending. Her hands shook as she listened to his voice on the screen, confessing the truth to the world, admitting the marriage began as a contract, but declaring his choice with conviction. Tears blurred her vision. She had never expected him to stand up for her, not like this. She remembered every cold word he had spoken, every warning to keep her distance. And yet, here he was, dismantling his empire piece by piece, all for her. Back in the boardroom, the backlash was swift. "You will destroy us all," one director shouted. But he only smiled faintly, as though he had been preparing for this moment all along. If protecting her means losing everything, then so be it. Power without integrity is worthless. Oh, the meeting ended in chaos. Directors storming out, phones buzzing with frantic calls. He remained seated, calm in the storm he had unleashed. He had crossed the line between contract and truth, and there was no going back. That night, when he returned to the mansion, the halls felt emptier than ever. Her absence was everywhere, the quiet kitchen, the untouched balcony, the empty side of the bed. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the rain streaking down the windows. For a man who had always played the game to win, this was the first time he had chosen to lose. And yet, it did not feel like defeat. It felt like freedom. He had finally told the truth. Now all that was left was to find her, to tell her the words he had only whispered in fragments before. Because this time, when he said, "Trust me," it would not be part of a contract. It would be a vow. The storm he had unleashed rippled far beyond the boardroom. The very people who had plotted to ruin him now found their schemes unraveling. The leaked contract that was meant to humiliate her instead backfired when his confession spread across every news channel. Viewers replayed his words over and over. If protecting her means losing everything, then so be it. Public opinion shifted swiftly. What once looked like a scandal began to feel like a love story. Commentators debated on live television, some calling him reckless, others calling him the only leader brave enough to stand for something real. Social media erupted with support for her, strangers defending her against the cruelty she had endured. "She deserves respect," one post read, shared thousands of times. If a man with billions can admit his mistakes for her, maybe she is not the liar people said she was. The opponents who had orchestrated the smear campaign were suddenly on the defensive. Journalists uncovered their financial ties and underhanded deals. The very executives who had mocked her were now the ones dodging reporters and hiding from scandal. The empire that once cornered her was cracking under its own corruption. Back in her apartment, she watched the news unfold with disbelief. Every cruel headline that had once painted her as a fraud was being replaced with words like vindicated and redeemed. She did not know whether to cry or laugh. All she knew was that the man she had once believed, cold and unreachable, had given her something priceless, her dignity back. At the mansion, he met with his legal team. They warned him of the consequences: loss of control, lawsuits, shareholders abandoning him. But he only dismissed them with a quiet certainty. Integrity is worth more than a throne built on lies. His words carried the weight of finality. The power games, the manipulation, the endless whispers of scandal, they were no longer his concern. He had made his choice, and in doing so, he had rewritten the very narrative his enemies tried to trap him in. The empire might shift, fortunes might rise and fall, but one truth remained unshaken. He had stood for her when no one else would. And somewhere across the city, as she held her sketchbook against her chest, she realized that maybe, just maybe, his words, "Trust me," were not a warning after all. They were a promise. Days passed before he finally found the courage to go to her. Not with cameras trailing or board members watching, but alone, carrying nothing except the weight of what he needed to say. The rain had cleared, leaving the streets slick and shining under the glow of street lamps. He stood outside her modest apartment, so different from the mansion on the hill, and knocked. When she opened the door, she froze. He looked nothing like the polished billionaire the world knew. His suit was wrinkled, his tie absent, his eyes tired but clear. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he held out something she recognized instantly, her sketchbook, the one she had left behind. "I believe this belongs to you," he said quietly. Her throat tightened as she took it, fingers brushing against his. She wanted to close the door, to protect herself. But his next words stopped her. "I told the world the truth, but I have not told you mine." He stepped inside, rain dripping from his coat onto the floor. His voice was steady, stripped of every layer of pretense. "When this began, I thought it was just a contract, a shield. But somewhere along the way, you became more than that. I do not care about the company. I do not care about the board. All I care about is this." He reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "Trust me. This time, it is not a deal. It is my life." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling before she could stop them. She remembered every moment: the daisies in her hands, the humiliation at the table, the whispers in the storm. And she remembered how he had stood for her when no one else did. The walls she had built around her heart trembled. Slowly, she nodded. "Then prove it is real." He did not answer with promises or contracts. He simply pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers, the silence saying what words could not. For the first time, there were no terms, No rules, only two people choosing each other. Outside, the city moved on, headlines shifting to new scandals and stories. But in that quiet apartment, the ending of their contract became the beginning of something far greater. Because sometimes, love does not arrive with roses or vows spoken under chandeliers. Sometimes, it begins with a whisper in the dark, a sketchbook returned, and two words that mean everything. Trust me.